All right. Before we have a treat for you this morning. We got several dads that are going to be sharing some things with you about faith, about fatherhood, and it's just going to be really cool to hear from some dads, and just like the journey of being a dad. Right, not an easy one, but I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be part of this community. Super excited about hearing from these dads this morning. Let's roll. We've got a little video here. Let's roll that, and then we'll get the dads up here.
There are lots of things that regular people can do, but dads can't. Dads can't pitch a baseball very hard or hit one very far. When dads play hide and seek, they always get found, but they have a hard time finding you. They aren't very good wrestlers. Dads lose at checkers and cards and almost every other game. Dads like to go fishing, but they don't like to go alone, and they need extra practice baiting the hook. Dads don't seem to be able to drive very fast. Dads seem to have trouble holding onto their money. Dads can't see you hiding your lima beans at dinner time or feeding them to the cat. Dads like to give baths, but they can't help getting all wet. Dads can't read a book by themselves, and dads really need to be kissed goodnight at bedtime. There are so many things dads can't do, it's a wonder they make it through life at all. But dads can't give up. No matter how tired a dad gets or how hard life gets, a dad never quits. Thanks, Dad. Happy Father's Day.
Hey, so I know Father's Day. There are many of us who grew up with great dads, but many of us also who grew up in homes where there was not a dad present, and so we're also aware of that. We're also aware that some of us have lost dads, even as of recent. And so I know a day like Father's Day can be like a bittersweet time, right? I know it could be difficult for some and joyous for others. But either way, as a community, here's one thing that we just want to share that with you, right? We just want to be in that space with you in times of joy and times of sorrow and all those kinds of things and everything in between. And so I guess that's why we're called Commons Church. We know we kind of hold everything in common, and we hold so much more in Jesus. And so we asked several dads to come and share. Guys, I'm going to ask you to come on and make your way up. Curtis, Uncle Ben, Dan. Dan is going to be facilitating the conversation. I'm going to actually turn it over to Dan, and they're just going to share some things with us. Here you go.
Okay. Well, so today is Father's Day, but of course, there can be no fathers without moms. And of course, we already had Mother's Day. That's been a holiday for well over 100 years. Father's Day only started in the United States in 1970. So it hasn't been a holiday that long. And we're kind of, as most of the time as Americans are, we're out of sync with the rest of the world. The official Father's Day for most of the world is actually in March, and it is for the patron saint, St. Joseph, who was the earthly father of Jesus. He's second only to Mary in the Catholic Church, who's, of course, everybody knows who the Virgin Mary is. So dads are, I know that, as Carlos said, this can be a triggering time for a lot of folks because practically everybody's got a mom, but not everybody had a dad. So we do want to acknowledge that and just say, as dads, we apologize to anyone in the room who had a bad experience with a dad, and we would be happy to pray with you after the service. But first and foremost, we just want to say, it is Father's Day. We acknowledge that. And we, as dads, apologize for any problems that you had with your dad. So let's start. We got some questions that we're going to ask. The first question I'm going to ask is, how many kids do you have?
I have 2, one of each kind.
Okay. He's got his own mic. Where's your mic?
Ask that question, Dan. Thank you. How many kids do I have? I said, my goodness, after 5, I thought I stopped counting. But, I Actually, I got 5 girls. Okay. And 2 of my other one that, my wife liked to take care of the children. I don't know where she's at.
Oh, don't worry, she'll be here.
And we end up adopting 2 daughters to the lifespan that we spend being foster parents. So the 2 that we have is live with us since they one is 6 years about 3 years old, and the other one is at birth. But that's what it is. I end up about 5, but when we talk about, did you ask grandkids?
No.
Okay, that later on. But I'm glad, we're looking, when one process of our adoption is to have a son. But guess what? In my family, it's all girls. Yeah. Right, Sarah? Yes, it's all girls. Even my pets. I'm the only one really survived through the lifetime living with all women at the house.
You hang on to that. All right, so next question then is, which is it easier to be, a boy dad or a girl dad? You've got an opinion?
Did you want to go first at all or anything?
I'm a girl dad. I got 3 daughters, and based on my experience and my observation of my friends that had boys, girl dads have it much easier than boy dads. Boy dads are always in the emergency room with their boys, and girl dads are like the worst it gets is tea parties and prom dresses. It's not that bad.
So, Mary will tell you that I am a worrier, and I worry and have worried about both of them growing up equally. Always wanting to make sure they get in at night okay, waiting up for them. Making sure they have a parking spot in our condo complex when they come home late at night. I think I've worried about each of them equally, sort of. So, yeah, it's kind of equal for me, I would say. Yeah.
That's easy for me, I don't have to compare having a son or a daughter, which one is easier. But to tell you honestly, I think without my wife, it's hard for me to deal with all the daughters that you have in the house. Especially when they said, those time that you don't know how to control them or whatever it is. When they come to you, Dad, what do I need to do when I'm in this situation? Talk to your mom. So I'm not in the position. So I always have diverted that some of the question to my wife. I said, I don't have the answer for that because, So always my wife bailed me out. Dealing with those situations, especially, being in the military, served 30 years. Most of my lifetime in the Navy, I've been out of the house, So, stuff. Thank you.
Well, if you didn't have a good father, how do you be a good father? You want to ponder that? If you didn't have a good father, how do you be a good father? So while you're thinking about that, there is one of my favorite incidents in the Bible is when Jesus is telling a story to a crowd of people, and he says to them, which among you, if your child asks you for a fish, would you give him a snake? If he asks you for a loaf of bread, would you give him a stone? If, therefore, you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father give the gift of the Holy Spirit to those who ask? But the backhanded part of that whole story is he looks at the crowd and he says, if therefore you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your own children. So, I think he was trying to tell us something. We're not going to get into that necessarily, but I do know that try as hard as we can. Dads always try to do the best job that they can do, but we don't always do the right job. We don't always do it correctly. So And I certainly know with my dad, who was a good dad, and he tried very hard, that there were occasionally there were shortcomings. And I think that one of the things that, if you didn't say it yourself growing up, you probably heard a friend say it, which was, when I become a parent, I'm not going to do what my parents do. And it's almost always the case that we try very hard not to repeat the mistakes that our parents made. We're going to find new mistakes to make. We'll make our own mistakes that are different, but everybody's going to make mistakes. And we're always going to just have to try to do the best that we can do. So back to the question, now that I've given you a little time, if you didn't have a good father, how do you be a good father? Any thoughts on that? And these are optional. If you don't have, you can just
Well,
pass.
you know, for me, it's just reminiscence about when I'm growing up. My father passed away when I was 5 years old. You know, I'm trying to learn from that, but how could I learn? It is hard because I didn't grow up with a dad. To be able to learn through the mistakes and not to make the choices that I know the result is something that, you know, might not be good, something that you always, you know, worry about. But as I growing up as a dad, you know, my first impression, I'm going to be a perfect dad. But you know what? That is tough. It's hard. You know, to be perfect is sometimes that, you know, you're going to lose and I'm going to lose because I know I'm not perfect. Because there's a lot of things for me to learn. Step into the hat of being that man. Straightforward, especially when my children, my daughters ask me for something, I should have the answer. And I don't have the answer. It's tough. But I learned to know that I could rely on a perfect dad. And that is the man, the God that I know, I believe, that I could rely on. And he is perfect. If I seek his face in my presence, whatever questions or I'm going to respond, I think I place that and ask and seek his presence before I open my mouth and make that decision.
Fortunate, my dad is still here. He's still with us. My dad was a good dad growing up. He worked hard. He took lots of overtime at work when it was available. He coached baseball, coached basketball. You know, I did learn a lot from him. He did come out one early morning. I recall I was driving to work that I started at 5 a.m. in the morning. I was still at home. I was around probably Sam's age. My car broke down on the way to work. You know, I called my dad, and, you know, he came out, tried to help me out with the car, you know, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. You know, that's just the kind of dad that I wanted to try to be. And, of course, as you mentioned, growing up, there were some things that I would see or whatever he would do, and I would say, wow, I don't want to be like that when I grow up, you know. But I think I've already done some of those things, but I'm always thinking of that in the back of my mind, but yeah.
I think that part of the role of being a dad, and again, it's clear that for some of us, dad was absent in our lives. But the first step in being a good dad is just to be there, to show up, to be present. And you can unpack that a lot of different ways, not just physically present, because I know of dads who were physically present in the room and they were absent as dad. But just showing up and being there for the kids is the very first step. So, next question. What are some things you want your kids to take from you as a father and pass on to their kids? What are some things you want your kids to take from you as a father and pass on to their kids? You want me to go? You go? You go? Me go? Okay. And by the way, most of these questions I got from some lady friends of mine, right? Why would I ask dads, like, what were some questions we should ask? Like, there are some of those questions on this list as well. You'll know immediately which of the questions that the dads came up with and which of the questions that the ladies came up with. This was one of the ladies' questions. So, what are some of the things you want your kids to take from you as a father and pass on? Well, I think that speaking as a man of faith, I hope that my kids will someday adopt the faith of that I have, the faith that their mom has, and that and I would say that good advice that I got when I was growing up, and I grew up in a Christian family. My dad was a pastor, and I grew up in a Christian family, and I was always told, marry a girl who loves Jesus more than you. And so I found that in her, and I would hope that our faith gets passed on to our kids. That's first and foremost. But then also just, the concept of grace and mercy, that mercy triumphs over justice, and that we want our kids to grow up loving grace and mercy.
So I would second that I would want my kids to continue to show their love for Jesus, and I would want them to continue to grow in that and bring their kids up that way. And I wanted to just, I made some notes, but my questions are different than the questions you've got, so.
Who'd you get your questions from?
So I guess I would say that, so Proverbs is like my favorite book in the Bible. And I love Proverbs because there's 31 of them, right? So there's one for each day of the month, depending on what month you're in. And so many of my go-tos are from Proverbs. And so, one of my go-tos is a man whose ways are pleasing to the Lord causes even his enemies to be at peace with him. And I believe that's 16 or it's in 21. I have many of the Proverbs memorized. I don't always have the number memorized. I apologize. But that one's always meant a lot to me. And I would ask or say that I would love my kids to have certain verses. I would encourage them to have certain verses that stand out to them. And I know Sam does have some certain ones that stand out to him. Hannah, our older daughter, I know that she has such a great love for Jesus as well. And Mary has just been instrumental in the kids in their love for Jesus and where they are. And I guess I would say that I hope and I pray that they will continue to do that with their kids.
For me, first of all, Dan, I was surprised. I'm not ready for the questions that you've been asking because, but anyway, put me in the spot just to think about it. Is that, what are my children's going to be, that I would like for them to do or remember. But growing up with my mom, she's a Christian. She will not miss a Sunday. And back home in the Philippines, we got church, and our house is next to the church. So every Sunday for sure, especially Sunday school, gonna carry me in the hand, if not by my ears, you go into church. So through her, be able to see, because she lived in a church, she's Christian, and from that I learned from her that, hey, she continued to serve the Lord. But for me to take that, I hope my children would relate with the, from Joshua 24:15. And the word is that, but for my house, we will serve the Lord. So I think that's what it is. It's something that hopefully they'll be able to continue on serving the Lord, for something that I would like for them to learn or remember.
Okay, we got time. If you could go back in time, what one piece of advice would you give yourself about being a father?
So I had a few things down on this. I put down, work will always be there. There will always be bills to pay, cars to be repaired. But just remember that, we have this brief time with our kids and our family. So put God and our kids and our family first. It's okay to miss a meeting, skip a shift, show up late to work if you need to at times for, a special event, a kid's game, something going on at the school, just to be there as much as you can. But at the same time, again, there's a proverb about being lazy, and, the lazy sluggard will not eat. So there's a fine line. You do have to work, obviously, right? But Mary's helped me over the years in recognizing and realizing that it's not all about work, that God will provide. And He does provide. And He doesn't always provide everything that we want, but He does provide everything that we need. And so she's had to slow me down at times over the years, and put the brakes on me, because I do tend to be a little bit of a workaholic. I don't want to say no to anybody, anytime, anywhere, and that in itself can be a weakness, So I would say make sure you put your family and your kids first. That time will go by so quickly. We read in the Bible multiple places that life is a vapor, it's a mist. In Genesis we read that, from dust we come, to dust we will return, and it goes by so quickly. So I guess that's what I would share.
Dan, could you rephrase the question again?
Yeah, if you could go back in time, what one piece of advice would you give yourself about being a father?
Most of you call me uncle. That tells me that I'm old, right? So went through a lot of life experiences and everything else, and most of them that I know, looking forward and always rely on you, that I have the answers, I have the wisdom, but you know what? I'm still learning. And the advice, might be more than one, but, one of them is, patience is virtue. That's always stick to my mind. But another one is that, we make choices in our life. Sometimes the choices that we make is something that easy, the result and outcome. But sometimes there are choices or decisions we're going to make that sometimes we never look and see later on the consequences, the outcome of that decision or choices that you make. So hopefully that for me, I learned in my life to be able, first is to make that easy choices in life. It's hard to make that hard choices, because when we make choices, sometimes later on we never thought about what's going to be the result. How's that going to affect people, family, relationship, your finances and everything else. There's a lot to be able to make that choices. So for me, I would just share that I learned that before I make that choices, I have to find my holy moments. Sometimes you cannot just go and blare it out and make decision without a thoughtful thing what's going to be the result of it. But either hard or easy choices, I will find my holy moments to be able to say, God, is this what you want? Find out, something that, seek and God be your collaborator to make the choices. And hopefully the choices you're going to make is something that you're going to able to go sleep at night, to be able to later on longing that you are with just like you are with your best friend, to be able to do that. So, I know I made bad choices and decisions that it is, but, some of them are still feel guilty about it. But once I learn how to bring about that holy moments with God to make that decision, it's much easier.
I think for myself, I would just go back in time and tell myself to be present with your kids. The cares and troubles of every day can oftentimes be a distraction. And especially little kids, they don't understand, what's going on. So just be present. But the other thing, I think, you've all heard the expression, probably you've heard the expression, if mom says no, go ask dad. Or if dad says no, go ask mom. Yeah, don't let that happen. As dads, you've got to be in sync with your wife. You got to love her and be in sync, and don't let the kids get in between you. So that's important. Let's go ahead and go back to one of the questions that you did know about. I'm sure you have a story here. What are some funny stories that you remember from your dad, or do you have a funny dad story of your own? Come on, Dad.
Okay. I wrote down a few. My dad was out visiting one time, and he was staying at a hotel, and we would drive back and forth to pick him up each day. And I called him to tell him we were on our way to pick him up. And we got into the parking lot to pick him up, and he had gotten in the wrong car. We had a silver Saturn, and Mary had a yellow Beetle. And I think that he thought I was coming in the Saturn to get him, but we came in the Beetle to get him. And he got into a similar-looking silver sedan in the parking lot of this hotel and got in the back seat of the car, which is what he was used to getting into. And he looked around and said, "You're not my son." And so that was funny. We still laugh about that. Another time I was going into a restaurant with him on one of his visits here, and they had a sign out front, and it said, "Now hiring happy people." And he looked at it and said, "They don't want me." My dad sometimes in restaurants is very particular about Coke or Pepsi. Forget which one he likes. But he usually tries to tell them which type they should carry. It's funny, but but one time I was in a restaurant, and I think we were with a group of church people after church one day, and they asked me if I wanted white or wheat bread. And I looked and said, "What are my choices?" Because I didn't hear them say white or wheat bread, apparently. And they give me a hard time about that. But one of the fun stories I have is Sam and I were wrestling one day when he was very small, and he launched himself off the couch and I wasn't ready for it. And I think his knee caught me in the eye. And I had a black eye for about, I don't know, 2 weeks, a really huge black eye. And, you know, I tried getting people to believe that it was from my son wrestling with me, but I don't know how many people believed that. I think it was something else, but that was a fun story.
For me, you know, there's so many moments that you trying to look back. You know, if I could remember, you know, memories, not only with my daughters, but with my grandchildren as they growing up. So, you know, it is something that I always remember. At this stage of my life, being retired, as you might say, and continue to make happy moments all the time. You know, making that, you know, enjoy the family as much as you can. I think that's what it is. And remember a lot of things. Hopefully when I'm sitting on my rocking chair, I'm going to say, oh man, I remember that. You know, and always going to be able to say, you know, as Dan asked about, you know, some of these funny moments. And, you know, as I said, there's a lot. One of those things is that I remember with my grandson, 5 years old, and he living with us at there, you know, when the family's starting. And, you know, as a grandpa, you always want to take that moments for them to be able to learn, to be able to, you know, whatever is an opportunity for them to teach them. And hopefully you'll find a way and be able to catch it, because not only they will remember it, but something that later on in life you're going to be saying, I remember that when I say this is what happened, and that is the happy moments. To tell you what it is, I'm sure some of you are, you know, would like to hear, is that, so a grandson, 5 years old, trying to take this opportunity to teach the young children to be able to, you know, in a dinner table, you know, and I learned from my mom, you know, whatever you have on your plate, you better eat it, right? Sometimes you're trying to convince them and bargain with them. I'm going to give you treats, whatever it is. But I found out that it's easier to, you know, to collaborate or deal with Taliban rather than your grandkids, because sometimes it's hard. So think about sitting on the table, dinner table, you and your grandson, 5 years old, and you're serious about it. I'm going to say, and, you know, there's a time that they don't want to finish their food on the plate, right? And now you're going to say, gosh, how could I make them? I don't want to go ahead and bargain, but I pull out this from the hat and go say, you know, there's a lot of people who are starving because they don't have food to eat on the table. And here you are, got everything on the plate, and you're gonna waste it. So I think, just think about it. You have the opportunity to go ahead and, you know, eat whatever you had the plate, because don't waste it. A lot of people are starving. And look at that 5-year-old that look at me. I'm wondering, and he is serious about it. And he said, Grandpa, why don't you eat it? I don't know how to put my face in there and you either laugh or get mad, but, you know, I just realized that, you know, kid is serious about it, and don't took whatever my intention is about teaching what's really relevant in life and be able to learn from it. But, you know, it just always stuck to my mind when I think about it. So.
Well, that's been my problem. I eat everything on my plate and half of what's on my wife's plate. So, so real quick, my story. So our firstborn child was about 4 months old. We took her camping. We went camping just below Carmel, the Ventana Wilderness area, and did a day hike to Point Lobos State Park. Beautiful Point Lobos State Park. You should go if you ever get a chance. And it was an unusual day, late October. The sea was like glass, just absolutely, and low tide. And tide pools galore that stretched, 100 yards offshore. And so here I had my baby, 4-month-old baby, in a sling, like a little football. And I'm walking on these really sharp rocks, walking out to see the tide pools. And I kept going and going and going until I was at the last rock and looking. And it was the craziest thing because there's the ocean. You're standing on this rock that's 2 feet above the water, and it's like you're at a lake looking in at the water. And then that's when everybody started shouting because a rogue wave just out of nowhere started coming towards us. And I look up, and it's taller than I am. And I'm standing on a rock at the very farthest point from the shore, and I know I can't scramble back over the rocks with this baby. I'm going to trip, and I'm going to get rolled with this baby over these rocks. So what do? So I stood there. I planted myself firmly on the rock, grabbed the baby, thought to myself, when the wave hits, I'll dive straight into it and try to go through the wave. And so I stand there, and I'm holding the kid. And of course, I prayed. I said, Lord, I commit my life and my child's life into your hands. And this wave came, and it was a serious wave. It hit the rock and went straight up like a wall of water, like a waterfall around me. Not one drop of water hit us. The wave went straight up. It went straight down. I stood there, and as soon as it was gone, and all these people were shouting. There was 100 people on the beach, right? As soon as it was done, I just acted like nothing had happened, turned around, and I walked calmly back over the rocks, back to the beach. And Sally walked up to me, and she said, if you ever endanger my child again, I will kill you. So I'm like, okay. So we learned our lesson. So, well, I just want to, we're out of time. We're going to end, even though we didn't get through all the questions. We're going to end now. And I just want to say, again, that, the way that you've attached to your mom and your dad has an impact on who you are, and it has an impact on your identity. And I just want to say that your history is not your destiny. Whether it's a good history or a bad history, that is not who you're going to be. You have a choice. And Scripture says, God says, I have good plans for you, a plan for a hope and a future, not plans for evil. So there is always hope. So again, happy Father's Day, and let's just celebrate.
Hey, give these guys another hand, please.